You are in Constantinople on the night of April 23rd, 1915. Not Istanbul, not yet. Constantinople, the city that calls itself the center of the world, because for 1,000 years it was. You are a writer, a poet, a priest, a lawyer, a doctor. You are by every measure the best your people have produced, the architects of Armenian civilization inside an empire that has always tolerated you with one hand and taxed you with the other. Tonight, you are sitting in your home in the Para district, or perhaps near the Armenian quarter of Kumkapi, and the city is warm. Spring came early this year. Your wife has left a lamp burning, your children are asleep. You're not worried. You know there is a war. You know the empire is under pressure. You know that some of your community leaders have been questioned, but you are not a soldier. You are not a revolutionary. You are a man who writes poems, or argues cases in court, or heals the sick. What would they want with you? The knock comes after midnight. Not loud, deliberate. The kind of knock that has already decided what it'll do before your hand reaches the door. On April 24, 1915, Ottoman authorities arrested 235 Armenian intellectuals and community leaders in Constantinople in the single night. They had a list. They had been compiling it for months. Every name on it was a person of learning, of standing, of cultural influence. Almost none of them came back. That night, that knock is why today exists. This is the Armenian Genocide, 1915. Subscribe, or don't, but you won't find this channel again by accident. The algorithm almost certainly won't bring you back here. Before the marches, there was a world. You need to understand that first. You need to see it before it disappears. The Armenians are among the oldest continuously inhabited peoples on Earth. Their homeland, the high plateau of eastern Anatolia at the base of Mount Ararat, had been settled for millennia before the Ottoman Empire existed, before Islam arrived in the region, before the Mongols swept through and remade everything. In 301 AD, Armenia became the first nation in history to adopt Christianity as its state religion. It precedes the Roman conversion by over a decade. The Armenian Apostolic Church, built on the teaching of Gregory the Illuminator, is one of the oldest Christian institutions still functioning in the world. The Armenians developed their own alphabet, their own theological tradition, their own literature, music, and law. By the medieval period, Armenian merchants had trade routes that reached from Venice to India. Armenian architects were building churches that would later influence Byzantine and Islamic design. They were absorbed into the Ottoman Empire not by invitation, but by conquest. And yet, within the empire, they found a functional place. Under the millet system, they governed themselves in religious matters, ran their own schools, maintained their churches. They became known as the loyal millet, the trustworthy community. Armenians held positions as bankers, diplomats, physicians, architects. They built some of the most significant structures in the empire. By 1900, approximately 2 million Armenians lived within Ottoman borders. They were concentrated primarily in the 6 eastern provinces: Erzurum, Bitlis, Van, Diyarbakir, Mamouret-ul-Aziz in Sivas, but had significant communities in Constantinople and across the empire. They had been there, in some form, for longer than the Ottoman itself had existed. That fact did not protect them. An empire does not decide to commit genocide in a single moment. It arrives there through a sequence of smaller decisions, each one feeling to the men making it like a reasonable response to a desperate situation. The Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century was in freefall. It had lost the Balkans, it had lost North Africa. The so-called sick man of Europe was by 1912 hemorrhaging territory on every border. Millions of Muslim refugees flooded into Anatolia. Men and women who had watched their homes become Greek or Bulgarian or Serbian and were furious about it. Into this crisis stepped the Committee of Union and Progress, the Young Turks. They were nationalists, modernizers, men who believed the empire could be saved not through reform and pluralism, but through purification, a Turkish state for Turkish people. One language, one identity, one religion. The Armenians did not fit that vision. They were Christian. They were concentrated in eastern Anatolia, the same territory that Russia, the Ottoman Empire's greatest rival, was pressing from the north. And some Armenian political movements had, over the decades, agitated for autonomy or independence. This was enough. Not because the Armenians posed an actual military threat, the Ottoman-owned military commanders knew they did not, but because they were a problem, a demographic, political, existential problem that the Young Turk leadership had decided to solve permanently. World War I was the opportunity. The Ottomans entered the war in November 1914 on the side of Germany and the Central Powers. Within weeks, the CUP's interior minister, Talat Pasha, in his circle, began drafting the mechanism. A special organization, the Teşkilat-e-Mahsusa, was formed from released convicts and irregular fighters. Their purpose was not to fight the Russians. Their purpose was to kill the Armenians. In January of 1915, the Ottomans suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Sarıkamış, one of the worst losses of the entire war. Enver Pasha, who commanded the offensive, had lost perhaps 90,000 men to Russian forces in the brutal Anatolian winter. The Young Turks blamed the Armenians, not because there was evidence of Armenian betrayal, there was not, but because blame was necessary, and the Armenians were available. In February of 1915, Armenian soldiers in the Ottoman army were disarmed and transferred to labor battalions. Then they were taken into the mountains and shot. Those were the first deaths. They would not be the last. Return now to Constantinople, April 24. The list had been prepared carefully. Bishops, journalists, poets, the editor of a major Armenian newspaper, a member of the Ottoman Parliament, lawyers who had spent their careers arguing for Armenian rights through legal channels, through the system, men who had bet their lives on the idea that civil society could protect them. Daniel Varugin was one of the finest poets in the Armenian language. He had published work that literary critics in Europe admired. He was 31 years old. Grigoris Zoreb was a celebrated novelist and a sitting member of the Ottoman Parliament. He had friends in the government. He was certain those friendships would save him. They were both arrested that night. Both were dead within months. This is the first thing you need to understand about how genocide works. It does not begin with the powerless. It begins by decapitating the powerful. Remove the writers, and you remove the language that resistance might use. Remove the lawyers, and you remove the men who know how to fight a legal case. Remove the clergy, and you remove the spiritual structure that holds a community together. remove the politicians, and you remove the last voices who could appeal to the state's own conscience. Then you deport the rest. The arrests of April 24 were the signal. Within weeks, deportation orders began arriving in the eastern provinces. The message to Armenian communities was always the same. You were being resettled. You will be relocated south for your own safety. You may take what you can carry. Most people believed it. What else do you believe when the alternative is too large to hold? You are walking. You have been walking for 3 weeks. The road south through Anatolia was not built for this many people. It was not built for people altogether, not for people carrying their lives on their backs, not for the elderly who cannot keep the pace, not for mothers whose children can no longer walk on their own. The gendarmes ride horses. They are not all soldiers. Some are convicts released specifically for this. Some are Kurdish tribal irregulars who were told the Armenians were enemies of the empire. The ideology does not require unanimity. It only requires enough people willing to do what they're told, and a few willing to do more. The men were separated in most convoys before the march began, taken into the hills in small groups, shot or bayoneted or beaten. The women were told they would be reunited further south. They would not be reunited. The marches began in the spring of 1915. By the summer, they were in full operation across the eastern provinces. Hundreds of thousands of people, estimates range from 600,000 to over 1 million, driven south toward the Syrian desert. There was no food, there was no water provided. Those who stopped were killed. Those who fell were left. Those who resisted were killed immediately. In the province of Van, Armenians had received early warning and fortified the city, holding off the Ottoman attack until Russian forces arrived. 55,000 bodies were found in the province when the siege lifted. Half the pre-war Armenian population, dead in weeks. The bodies floated down the Tigris and the Euphrates in such numbers that they blocked the rivers and had to be cleared. That sentence contains a fact so large it refuses to be absorbed. Let it sit. The survivors who reached the Syrian desert were placed in concentration camps, Deir ez-Zor, Ras Al-Ain, structures that provided nothing, no shelter worth the name, no medicine, near starvation rations. Disease moved through the camps. Women and girls were bought and sold by camp guards and local tribesmen. The living envied the ones who had died quickly. In February of 1916, when most of the genocide's primary killing phase was already complete, Talat Pasha ordered a second wave. He was afraid that the survivors might return after the war. The remaining camps were liquidated, convoys sent further south into the desert. Another 200,000 people killed between March and October of 1916. The Ottoman government knew exactly what it was doing. Talat Pasha was later quoted telling the American ambassador, Henry Morgenthau, that the government had already done so much to destroy the Armenians that there was no point in trying to protect them now. He said that as if it were a logistical observation, a problem that had been solved. Some people survived. Not many, but some. Survival in the Armenian Genocide was not a matter of strength or will alone. It was a matter of particular circumstances, being in the right convoy, near the right village, with the right kind of help offered by strangers who risked their own lives to give it.
Some Armenians were hidden by Arab families in Syria who refused to participate in the killing. Some were sheltered by Kurdish villagers who, despite official encouragement to join the violence, chose otherwise. Some were taken in by Turkish households and raised under different names. Some converted, publicly, formally, to Islam and were allowed to live. Some children were too young to know it was happening and were simply absorbed into other families, their names changed, their origins erased. The cost of that survival was the loss of yourself. You survived by becoming someone else. You survived by not speaking your language, not practicing your faith, not saying the names of your parents in public, not asking questions about where your family had gone. You survived by performing belonging in a world that decided you did not belong. Some survivors reached Aleppo. Some reached the Caucasus ahead of the Russian military. A small number made it to Lebanon, to France, to the United States. In Musa Dagh, a mountain on the Mediterranean coast, 4,000 Armenians held off Ottoman forces for 53 days before French naval ships passing offshore spotted their signal flags and took them aboard. It is one of the few stories from this period with a dramatic rescue. Franz Werfel later turned it into a novel that became famous across the world. But Musa Dagh was the exception. It endures because exceptions are what we reach for when the rest of the story is too large to hold. What it took to survive was this: losing almost everyone, carrying the weight of that loss silently for decades in countries that did not understand what you had come from or what had been done to you, watching your children grow up without a homeland, listening to the world argue over what happened to your family even had a name.
The Armenian Genocide was not a secret. It could not be. The Ottoman Empire was at war with Britain, France, and Russia. Allied diplomats were stationed across the region. American missionaries and consuls were present in the provinces. German military officers, Ottoman allies, were embedded with the army. Journalists were filing dispatches. The New York Times reported on the killings repeatedly. In 1915 alone, the paper ran dozens of stories describing what was happening in Anatolia. One headline from August of that year read, "800,000 Armenians counted destroyed." They knew. The Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, issued a joint statement in May of 1915 explicitly condemning what they called crimes against humanity and civilization. This is one of the first recorded uses of the phrase crimes against humanity in the context of modern warfare. They threatened to hold the perpetrators personally responsible. Nothing followed from that threat. The war continued, the deportations continued, the killings continued. The United States was neutral. Ambassador Morgenthau sent increasingly desperate cables to Washington, describing what he was witnessing and hearing. He met personally with Talat Pasha. He appealed. He argued. Talat, by Morgenthau's own account, told him plainly that the government's decision was final. Morgenthau left Constantinople in 1916, shattered. American churches and philanthropic organizations raised millions of dollars for Armenian relief. The Near East Relief Organization ultimately provided aid to hundreds of thousands of survivors. The public knew. Ordinary Americans donated money because ordinary Americans had read about it in their newspapers. And yet, the killing proceeded, because knowing is not the same as acting. Germany knew most of all. German officers were present at the deportations. Some objected internally, some
documented what they saw. One German military officer later wrote that the Armenians were being annihilated systematically. The word systematically appeared in the official report. Berlin suppressed it. The alliance with the Ottomans mattered more. By 1917, the killing was largely complete. By 1918, the war was over. The Ottoman government that had planned and executed the genocide was defeated. Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and other key architects fled the country. Ottoman military courts subsequently tried them in absentia. Talat Pasha was convicted and sentenced to death. He was living in Berlin. In 1921, a young Armenian survivor named Soghomon Telyurin walked up behind him on a Berlin street and shot him. At trial, Telyurin told the court what had happened to his family. The court acquitted him.
There is a man you need to know. His name is Raphael Lemkin. He was a Polish-Jewish lawyer born in 1900 who grew up reading about the Armenian massacres with a sense of horror he could not fully articulate. He went on to study law. He devoted much of his intellectual life to a single question. What do you call it when a state attempts to destroy a people? The law had no word for it. Nations could be condemned for war crimes, for massacres, for atrocities, but there was no legal concept that described the intentional elimination of an ethnic or religious group as such. The attempt not just to kill people, but to erase a people. In 1944, Lemkin coined a new word. He combined the Greek genos, race or people, with the Latin citium, killing, genocide. He published it in a book about Nazi policy in occupied Europe. When the United Nations drafted its Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948, it was Lemkin's word, Lemkin's framework, Lemkin's insistence that shaped the final document. The Armenians were in his mind the whole time. He had been trying, for decades, to build the legal architecture that would have protected them. The Republic of Turkey, successor state to the Ottoman Empire, has never acknowledged the genocide. The official position is that mass deportations occurred for legitimate wartime security reasons and that Armenians died in large numbers, as did many other communities, in the chaos of World War I. The word genocide, they insist, does not apply. This denial is not incidental. It is policy, systematic, sustained, officially enforced. School books in Turkey do not teach what happened. Journalists in Turkey who have called it genocide have faced prosecution under laws prohibiting insults to Turkish identity. A Nobel laureate was put on trial. The charge was essentially this: you said the word. The denial compounds the original crime, because to deny it is to tell every Armenian survivor, every descendant of a survivor, that what happened to their family did not have the name that history has given it, that their grief is in dispute, that the world's judgment about what was done to their people remains somehow open. As of today, more than 30 countries formally recognize the Armenian genocide, including the United States, which passed recognition in 2021 under President Biden, the European Parliament, France, Germany, many others. Turkey is not among them. In 1914, there were 2,538 Armenian churches in the Ottoman Empire, 451 monasteries, nearly 2,000 Armenian schools. Today, outside of Istanbul, Armenians possess 6 churches, no monasteries, no schools.
There is a hill in Yerevan, the capital of the modern Republic of Armenia. On that hill stands a monument. An eternal flame burns at its center, inside a ring of 12 stone slabs arranged in a circle. The slabs represent the 12 provinces in which the genocide was carried out. The flame does not go out. Every year on April 24, hundreds of thousands of people come to that hill. They walk in silence. They carry flowers, carnations mostly. They place them around the flame. They stand there. They do not give speeches for the most part. They just stand. Because what happened here cannot be adequately summarized. It can only be witnessed. And in the absence of those who experienced it, witnessing means standing somewhere and refusing to look away. Daniel Varoujan, the poet arrested in Constantinople on the night of April 24, wrote some of his most celebrated work in the months before his death. He was taken from the transport convoy somewhere in the interior of Anatolia. The exact circumstances of his death are not fully known. He was 31 years old. His poems survived, hidden, copied, carried across borders by survivors who understood that the words of a people are not an abstraction, they are the people. To preserve the poem is to preserve something of the man. To preserve the man is to preserve some evidence that he existed. This is why genocide targets writers first. Somewhere between 600,000 and 1.5 million Armenians were killed between 1915 and 1923. The range is wide because the record-keeping was imperfect, because some killing took place in remote areas that no witness survived to document, and because the state that carried it out spent considerable effort ensuring the numbers would never be fully known. But behind the range of numbers are individual people. They had names. They had addresses in Erzurum and Van and Constantinople. They had debts and songs and arguments with their neighbors and children who needed feeding and elderly parents who needed care. They were not a statistic. They were not an abstraction. They were people who were named, located, and systematically killed by a state that had decided their existence was inconvenient. That state's government still will not say the word. But the word exists. Raphael Lemkin gave it to us precisely so that we would have it when we needed it. So that the silence the perpetrators were counting on, the silence of a world that would forget or grow tired, would decide that geopolitical relationships mattered more than historical truth, would not be total. Genocide. 1915. The Armenians. Remember them. Say their name.